Okay, we're going to officially call the meeting to order. These Slido questions, they're going to be so great. So welcome everyone to our February, what day is it? 18th meeting on a Tuesday because we had a little holiday. So thanks everyone for making time on your Tuesday. First things first, we have some minutes. The minutes of February 10th. Can I have a motion to approve our minutes that you thoroughly read and enjoyed and digested? I see Dan Dugan with the motion. I see Mayor Wilkinson from Centerville with a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Any opposed? Great, our minutes are approved. The league staff has made us a very short agenda that you've probably seen online, so we're going to get through this no problem, along with a whole bunch of Slido questions. So as a reminder, when you're speaking, please remember to say your name and your city. Cameron, take us away.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Bradshaw, for getting us started. We do have several items we want to make sure to get feedback on from the group via Slido and out loud today. And thank you, everybody, both online and in person, for joining us for LPC today. The bills are coming fast and furious. As Kate indicated, we've got a lot on here. Before we get started, Mayor Ramsey, can I turn to you just to kind of give a quick overview for us as a former league president?
Okay, Seth is loving the power up here of controlling the mics. Okay, I am too. However, he's the one who did it. So really quickly, well, we know our pillars, they're on the screen: respect, outcomes, collaboration. And our themes this year, the state doesn't have a surplus and neither do we. I think today there's quite a few bills that we're going to talk about and weigh in on that might seem like one-offs. They might seem like they only impact a few cities, and my city demographic does not fit into that. But as we've discussed this as our city, actually a lot of these that at face value may not look like they impact us the same way as other cities. They do to a degree, or they could in the future. As each of us continue to grow and the state continues to grow and our cities look a little bit different, there are quite a few things that my hope is that when we look at these today, that maybe you will consider this might not be a bill that impacts my city today. However, it could as you keep growing, or if it is almost, as we like to say here, the camel's nose in the tent, it opens the door to additional. You might not live in a county of the first class yet, but if you're in Utah or Davis County, you might in the future, or certain bills for counties of the first class might get passed that could then be expanded to counties of the second class, things like that. Just be mindful. My hope is that as we go through these today and we talk about partnership, not preemption, that we recognize that some of these bills might not look like they necessarily impact our specific community. It might be just a handful that it affects. But this is there's a lot of important things we're going to talk about today. So my hope is that we'll really look at that and be mindful. We stay together as cities and we try to support each other if a policy proposal is not good for cities. So that's all I would say.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Now, knowing that the mics are working behind me, I've got to be watching my back even more than normal here. But thank you. I thought excellent framing with a lot of important issues on the docket here. The housing land use part, I hope this actually will be pretty quick. We spent a lot of time the last 2 weeks on the housing land use. So a lot of this is just an update. As a reminder, we're soliciting your feedback on the Housing Strategic Plan Phase 1, and we've requested that feedback from you by March 19th. And we want to hear from cities and towns of all shapes and sizes, and then we'll aggregate that feedback to share it with Steve Waldrop and his team, and then Phase 2 will get underway in April. We showed this last week, but just kind of a list in the different categories of what we've fought off so far, most of which has been behind the scenes, some of which has been public in the housing land use space, and trying to really lean into partnership over preemption as we approach challenging issues around housing land use and how we grow. These are the bills and how they've broken down in the different categories. And then there are additional bills popping up almost every day. We've already hit more than 800 bills, right, that are out now, and that number continues to grow. Since we last met last week, here's an update on several of the key housing bills. Representative Dunnigan has the political subdivisions bill, which is House Bill 37. He substituted that bill in committee on Thursday to reflect what we've talked about at LPC. And so I testified, as well as Mayor Walker, you can see there, testified in support of that bill. House Bill 360 and House Bill 368 are both Representative White's bills. The CHA's, the Commission on Housing Affordability bill. The LUTF is the Land Use Task Force bill. Those were all in the same committee last Thursday, all passed, all will be substituted on the House floor, because in particular, House Bill 368, the substitute was not ready for committee, and the substitute will reflect all of the work over the last few weeks of getting the specific language right. But we just wanted to report back to you, and thank you to Mayor Walker for his testimony on those bills. Another bill that I had on the agenda last week in this space, and we just ran out of time, but wanted to bring to your attention, is House Bill 320. Pretty simple bill, but this gets to a code enforcement challenge that we've heard from many cities around the state. And what this bill would do is to allow a city, if you have imposed a civil or criminal penalty at least 3 times within the last 12 months, that for that 4th violation, you could actually set a higher fine to try to deter that illegal behavior. So this bill passed out of committee last week. Based on the Slido results in January, quite a few cities told us this was a high priority. And so we testified in support of that bill last week, and it's moving through the process. Later today, SB 280 is going to be in committee. SB 280, Mayor Palmer, you'll appreciate this because you are up here long enough to see ideas that maybe aren't ready at the first moment start to take shape later. And I've mentioned Mayor Palmer from Harriman because we had kind of the joke a couple of weeks ago about kind of beat up on Mayor Palmer Day. But in this case, 4 years ago, Mayor Palmer and I had several meetings with legislators about what became House Bill 151, the retail incentive bill. And one of the key components in House Bill 151 was that cities could do retail incentives so long as there was part of a mixed use development and the housing was on site. And one of the back and forths that we had back then is, what does it mean to be on site? And that we never quite resolved that 4 years ago. SB 280 attempts to address that. And so, Mayor Palmer, I'm thinking about all the maps that you had brought into those meetings. In this case, housing can be within a quarter mile of the boundary of the retail facility. So it kind of opens up that flexibility for that mixed use space as opposed to having to maybe be in the exact same building. The bill also clarifies definitions around system improvements. And then this was a big piece that we heard from several economic development directors over the last few years, is that in 151, we're required to report to GOEO if we do the retail incentives, but GOEO had no sort of shot clock on them. So you conceivably in Sandy or in Layton or in Taylorsville City could do an incentive, report on it, and then learn 3 years later that GOEO thinks it was not in compliance and they've passed it on to the auditor. And by then the ship has sailed. So what we've agreed to with GOEO is that after 6 months, if there's no response, then it's considered compliant. And so there's some finality to that process. So we think all 3 of these changes reflect improvements on House Bill 151. Okay, let me pause there because 320 is new to the group. 280 is new to the group. We gave you the update on those other bills. Are there any questions about anything I've said thus far? Cassidy, any questions online? Okay. Another bill that came out over the weekend is in committee this afternoon is SB 262. This is Senator Fillmore's second housing bill. So I should note that SB 181, we've presented the last 2 weeks here. SB 181 has the changes to parking that we discussed and got a lot of Slido feedback on. That bill is in committee this afternoon. Our recommendation is to support SB 181 because that language reflects what our Slido results had told us over the last couple of months. And SB 181 is in the Commission on Housing Affordability package, along with 360 and 368 and 37. Okay, so that's all part of that package. 262 is separate from that package. 262 does 3 things. The bottom one, the technical clarifications, are important and need to pass. The second one is actually similar density overlay language than what was in Jim Dunnigan's House Bill 37 that was struck in committee last Thursday and replaced with the language that we preferred. Now that language is back into SB 262. When I talked to Senator Fillmore about this yesterday and today, he prefers this density overlay concept to what we replaced it with in House Bill 37, acknowledges that we have concerns about how that would work. It's still optional, but we prefer the approach we did in 37. And then on the general plans to be adopted by ordinance, there have been some in the Property Rights Coalition that have pushed for what we've referred to as binding general plans. So once something's in your general plan, that the city zoning cannot deviate from that general plan and locks your general plan in. There has been appetite for that sort of concept up here at the Capitol for years, and we've always pushed back on it because a general plan is fundamentally different than zoning. They're both legislative actions. General plan is aspirational. Zoning is where you get into the regulations of how that property is used. The language right now is just these two words, adopted by ordinance. So we asked this question of one of our groups this morning, is how many of your cities adopt general plans by ordinance? Some actually do, which then led us to the follow-up question, well, do you view your kind of general plan as binding, or can you have zoning that may be different from your general plan? And that's where the rub starts to come here. And our anxiousness is that even if the words by ordinance don't actually result in binding general plans, we know there are some who want to go in that direction. So as a result, we've told Senator Fillmore that our staff recommendation was going to be to oppose this bill because of those two words. The density overlay piece, we can work through that. Again, our preference would be to keep it consistent with what we just did last week, but the binding general plan concept is very concerning. So our staff recommendation would be to oppose as drafted because of that piece. Questions, thoughts, concerns, feedback? I hear my name. Let's go. Does that mic work, or do you need a mic?
I believe the microphone is working up here, thanks
Wow.
to Mr. Perrins. But good hustle from our intern. Thank you. One thing that I want to just emphasize is back in 2013, we had a referendum by our citizens that would have dramatically put us at conflict with what the legislature is trying to do with housing. The referendum, by the general plan not being binding, we were able to get out of the implications of what the referendum was shooting for. If something is binding, and if a referendum or something like that is very much opposed to the strategies of trying to provide affordable housing and things of that nature, it can be very detrimental. So there is a very real technical reason for us not wanting this to become binding on municipalities, especially when it puts us at conflict with what the state's trying to do.
No, it's an excellent point, Mark. And when I met with Senator Fillmore earlier today, his argument was if the city has planned this certain area of the city, he's frustrated that then the city is not zoning to allow that plan to come into action. And so he wants to have that conversation, whether the bill passes or not. And I expect that'll be part of the conversation this summer as well. He's trying to solve that issue. If your city's already planned for it, but then your zoning's not allowing it. And now you're, in his mind, restarting the process and not providing certainty to the public or to builders. So anyway, it would be his counter, but I thank you for raising that point. Any other thoughts on this one? Again, our recommendation is to oppose it. So we'll be speaking to, unless the committee tells us otherwise, we're going to ask you to talk to senators this afternoon in this committee, and we will speak against it in committee. It is in, Corey, it's in Senate Economic Development. There was a slide listing the members. Is that slide still in? Because it's later in the, hey, look at that. There it is. Look at this. I knew I wrote it last night. I just hadn't pressed click. So these are the senators that are in the Senate Economic Development Committee. If one of these senators is your senator, we urge you to let him know why you're concerned about a state requirement to adopt general plans by ordinance, and then what that means for your city authority. And then we've listed a few examples here of why general plans by ordinance in state law is bad policy. And I emphasize the in-state law piece because we were told by several cities this morning that they do their general plans by ordinance locally, which again, I think is workable based on your local ordinance clearly defining the role of the general plan versus the role of zoning. Based on how it's defined here, I think it's unclear for the state code provision. Okay, let us know once you talk to senators who are in that committee. Let us know what you hear back from them. We'll be there at 4 o'clock this afternoon. All right, that's all I've got on housing land use. Are there any final questions on that topic before we keep going? Okay, I'm going once, going twice. So let's go. Public safety. Yesterday, league staff was working all day to get ready for today, and we sent an email. How many saw the LPC preview email we sent yesterday? Okay, decent number of hands. That's great. We weren't sure if you'd see it on President's Day, but we wanted to send it anyway. And one of the asks in that LPC preview email was to make sure you talk to your police chiefs about House Bill 465. Before I go into detail about what 465 currently does as drafted, I want to just take a step back to explain some context of how 465 came to be. If you haven't seen the Salt Lake City Public Safety Plan that they released in January, I highly recommend that you take a look at it, make sure your police chiefs and police departments see it. Back in December, the governor, the Senate president, and the House Speaker requested that Salt Lake City create a comprehensive plan around public safety in the city, focused on challenges related to homelessness. That letter came in December, and the city, to their credit, took the letter and ran with it, and before the session started, produced a plan that has 50 recommendations, 27 of which are city-specific, 23 of which are for external partners. This is just a screenshot of the city's dashboard that's available on their website for the public to see about how the city is already starting to implement the public safety plan, okay? So in light of that, House Bill 465 has come about in the last couple of weeks, in large part because of frustration from certain legislators about the commitment of Salt Lake City to execute the public safety plan and to improve public safety conditions within the city. There are 3 components to the bill as currently drafted. Component number 1 is it compels the city of the first class who receives the homelessness mitigation funds to do an agreement with the Department of Public Safety. And there are 2 outcomes listed in the bill. One is to increase public safety, and the other is to ensure the proper function of city police department with generally accepted standards. So that's word for word from the bill. The second piece is that the city does not do the agreement by a certain date, then the state of Utah would withhold gas tax revenue from the city and withhold homelessness mitigation funds. Now, as a reminder, every city and town in the state receives gas tax revenues. And there have been multiple bills through my career up here where legislators have attempted to push cities to do X, Y, and Z, usually in the land use space, saying if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then the state will withhold gas tax revenues from you. And we have always fought those bills because we don't want the codified threat of withholding those gas tax dollars, okay? So the amount of gas tax varies by city, but every city and town receives gas tax revenues based on your population and your weighted lane mile. The homelessness mitigation fund we actually talked about at LPC a few weeks ago, and Molly presented the recommendation for this session that we not make any changes to increase or decrease the mitigation fund because we knew there were bigger conversations happening about a central campus model, and it didn't make sense to start making changes to the mitigation fund with that big unanswered question out there. Every city and town that does not have a qualifying facility contributes into the mitigation fund to help offset the public safety costs of the cities that do have those facilities. And those facilities are in cities, some cities of the first class, but they're also in cities of the second and third and fourth class. I'm looking for Molly to confirm that, but there are qualifying facilities in cities of multiple sizes. And then the third piece of the bill would task the Department of Public Safety with creating a rapid response team to respond to a public safety event, which is defined below in 1 and 2, of illegal camping, large-scale illegal drug distribution. And the way the bill is currently drafted, the rapid response team could deploy in any city of the first class, which is any city with 100,000 residents or more, and Sandy, because Sandy's grandfathered in as a city of the first class, even though their population's a little below 100,000. That's another story for another day. The bill is also silent on the other operational details. Okay. So let me pause there. Are there questions about what the bill does to date and kind of the context for how we got here? Councilmember Dugan, yeah, come on up. So you're here. Councilmember Dugan is councilmember in Salt Lake City and serves on the League Board of Directors. So I'll let you go first, then we'll open it up to see what questions people have.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate the time. And just to recap quickly on what Cam was just saying there. So in December, the mayor got a letter that was signed by the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the state president, the Senate president, stating their dissatisfaction with how the city was handling the homeless problem. And they said, hey, we want an answer of a plan by the time the legislative session started. And on 16 January, the mayor presented her plan, the city's plan, on addressing the issues that the governor and the speaker and the president addressed. It's a comprehensive plan. It goes through very detailed actions that the city will take, but it also has detailed actions that says, hey, we need legislative action and we need legislative funding. The city worked with DPS on some of these actions, on how we can collaborate and work together on providing this plan to the leadership. Very comprehensive, welcoming collaboration across the board, because it's not just a city problem, it's a statewide problem, and we have to address it as a statewide issue. And this bill actually doesn't accomplish anything. It actually impedes our action to bring about the changes, the positive changes we want to do here. Taking mitigation funds away from the city really kind of hampers what we're trying to do as far as public safety around those HRCs. Those funds are to help us address those issues around the HRCs. And it goes against any of the public safety side of the house. And all it is a punitive action against the city itself. There's no positive outcome of this. It doesn't address anything with specifics. It gives us no definition of success, and it doesn't address the actual problem that we have at hand. So it attacks the city who is trying to work the problems. And as a league, as what Mayor Ramsey pointed out there, our pillars, respect, collaboration, and outcome, it doesn't address any of that, and actually goes against all those issues right there. So we're opposed to it. We're right now working on an alternative plan, an alternative action here, so we can define some of the successes there, but also make sure that we're working with DPS and other cities to address the broader problem that we have across the state. So thank you very much. I'd love to have your support.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. Are there questions about how we got to this point with the bill and what's in the bill as drafted? And then I'll talk about some potential alternatives. Let's go, Mayor Silvestrini. Is that mic working, or do you need a mic?
Oh yeah, it's
look at
working
you.
magically. It's working. Okay. It's this mayor.
this. I've never, ever controlled a
I thought only Don Ramsey could do that, but apparently she must have done something. Hey, my concern about this bill, frankly, is that it is attempting to enforce our way out of the homelessness problem. And particularly given, even if we wanted to do that without adequate jail space, it doesn't work, okay? And I know this is a frustration by a lot of us that try to enforce a no camping ordinance. It's a tragedy for some of those folks to get them a criminal record as a result of a camping violation. But the bottom line of it is, if our cops transport somebody, they arrest them for camping and they transport them to jail, they're released before the paperwork is done. Without more jail space or housing options, you can't solve this problem with enforcement. And this kind of hammer it's just not going to work. Even if the state were to come in and try to direct enforcement on illegal camping or drug distribution, that's not the answer. We need to convince people that the answer really lies in providing resources and housing to people and not arresting them, because it doesn't work. I wish it did, I wish it did, but we don't have enough jail space. And especially given the challenges that we're going to face with other occupants of our jails, putting people who are unsheltered in there, it's just, it's futile. It's crazy.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Walker.
So as you look at this bill from our perspective as your league officers, me particularly as the president, we have been up here for years, and all of you know this, working together. And we say that partnership and not preemption, and we do mean it. And we have been in good faith on so many of these issues across the board. But this is pure preemption. How many of you in the room have a local police department? Online, I wish I could see it. I bet it's a huge number. I always tell our officers, there is no more local, no more face of the city than those law enforcement officers that are out there on the road. Almost all of the time, some of the only contact our citizens ever have are with our police officers. They are local law enforcement. That is what people want. We have local police departments, and we manage them the way we manage them because our citizens expect it and they want that certain level of service. They have the ability, those officers, to make a difference, and they do all across our cities. But their ability to work and operate inside our communities, in my mind, is paramount, and it should be through the local police chief, who the councils and mayors have appointed that direct the way that we police. This bill really forces the state into local law enforcement, and I think it's problematic for all of us. Now, the bill as written doesn't affect all of us. It affects very few of us. But it is truly the old camel getting his nose in the door if it were to go forward. Because as you look at the language of the bill, the rapid response team, we would all like a rapid response team if we have an event. We can certainly negotiate with DPS or sister cities or Salt Lake County or other counties to create. And in fact, a number of us cities, our South Valley cities, we already have worked together to create a special enforcement team that is actually doing amazing law enforcement. We don't need mandates. We don't need to force. And Salt Lake City, although they're the focus of this particular bill, this is the camel, man, getting in. And once he's in, he's hard to get out. And then when you go to the BNC road funds, the state doesn't fix these roads. We do. We take this money and fix the roads that our citizens use. So to put that out there as a hammer is also offensive to us as a league of cities and towns. We got to protect our funds. We got to protect our autonomy. Now, I'm certain Salt Lake City and all of us, everybody wants to negotiate for good public safety. The city's public safety plan, I've read it. It's actually well done. And it should be given time to be implemented. And even if you want to implement it over time, it could be implemented over time to see where it goes. And those partnerships could still be formed in a way that we get to the outcome that everybody wants, which is safe capital city or safe communities. But I do think as we look at this from our 1,000-foot level as members of the league, we got to stand together on it until it's better or it's not doing what they're trying to do. Because it's core and fundamental. There's no, like I said, there is no more fundamental public service than your local police officer on the corner with your neighbor pulled over because they want someone to talk to. And if it's the state, that's not going to make them happy. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Comment online?
Yeah, we have a question online. What does city does not do the agreement mean? Comply with proposed agreement, or is it execute the proposed agreement? What's that standard?
Yeah, in the bill right now, if the city did not sign the agreement, then the gas tax money is withheld. The mitigation money, part of the issue with the mitigation money is that the mitigation money could be repurposed to reimburse DPS for the work within the city as opposed to reimbursing the city for their public safety costs. So the bill passed out of committee on Friday. It's on the House floor. Now, I'm going to kind of read between the lines based on some of the comments that I'm hearing here. These are potential alternatives to 465 because, Mayor Walker, amen, Mayor Silvestrini, good point about the system changes. Molly's going to talk about some of the homelessness bills that are coming that are part of that systemic piece. There is a lot of frustration up here at the Capitol about the challenges related to homelessness and an acknowledgement that one city alone cannot fix them. And some view 465 as trying to make sure that partners are truly at the table. Now, I think the public safety plan demonstrates that partners are already at the table, but that's where I think this number one piece as an alternative to the bill would be to ensure that we have a partnership relationship. And I say we, cities collectively, and specifically, cities that are directly impacted by this bill, partnership relationship with DPS. And that's without having the withholding of funds hanging over folks and then clearing up these details about how the rapid response team could work. Mayor Zoltansky, and then we're going to open it up to Slido to get feedback on these concepts.
So Cam, a couple years ago in Sandy, we had a crime that was being investigated as a hate crime. And I was contacted by the Department of Justice. Our police chief was also with the offer to say, hey, we have experts in this field. If you need staff training, police training, community outreach, we have entire programs that focus on this and how to combat hate crimes, or what should a city's response be in the event this comes to your community. I welcome that outreach. I took that as an offer for aid and a specialized subject that we didn't have a lot of experience in. This is something quite different, saying, do it or else. The coercive effect of this as a new shelter city, Sandy, this was not in the brochure. I'll just put it that way. So I'm worried that this could have a chilling effect on subsequent cities considering coming online to offer shelter services in the future. And I think that is a very real consequence of this type of heavy-handed action. I'd much rather work together, sharing resources, sharing skills and experiences, as I've described with the, my past experience, the Department of Justice. That was welcome. It was additional, something that was outside of our skill set on that case. And I just, as drafted, 465, I would urge my fellow cities to oppose this as drafted. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Zoltansky. So again, staff recommendation when you ratify position today would be oppose as drafted. And then we've outlined potential alternatives here that get to the outcome of improved public safety, but do it through the partnership lens rather than the preemption lens, as Mayor Walker had indicated. Mayor Ramsey?
As far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, you can confirm this, but I believe the chiefs of police also have taken a position of oppose on this. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Make sure that was out there.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I mentioned the bill was in committee on Friday. Our testimony was that we had not yet formally considered it, so we were position pending, but we relayed some of the concerns we were already hearing with folks around the preemption rather than partnership and the operational questions around how this bill would actually work. And so we laid those out in committee on Friday. And now we're presenting it to you, make sure everyone's on the same page, and then we'll keep working on potential alternatives here to keep it in the partnership space rather than the preemption space. Any final comments on this one? This is a big one. Any final comments from anybody on this one? Okay. All right. In that case, we are now going to do Slido on this because we want to make sure we understand where everybody's at on these potential alternatives that we just laid out. So this will be helpful for us. I see a bunch of chats, but I assume somebody else is tracking them. Okay. So I'll leave this open. Okay. So the first question, how high a priority is opposing the requirement that a city shall enter into a contract with DPS that directs the city, and if they don't, they would the city jeopardizes gas tax and mitigation money. So how high of a priority is that to oppose? That's the first piece of this. Go ahead.
And I just also wanted to add, we have quite a few questions today asking about prioritization. We're tracking 220 some odd bills. We're not asking you to prioritize all of them, but it's helpful to know for us how much we care about an individual issue. So all of these could be high priority for you, but just recognize if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So yeah, I just want to give that context. You're welcome to rank everything as a high priority or low priority or medium priority, but just be aware there'll be a couple of these today trying to gauge your interest in them, and we're as staff trying to navigate how to allocate resources on a lot of these. So if you have any questions about that, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you, Carson. I'll leave this open for 20 more seconds. We're at 1:13, so I'll leave it open. Thank you, everybody online, by the way. Cassie, how many people do we have online? 183, and 100 plus in the room. So we're still around 300, which is awesome. I remember LPCs when we hit 100, and that felt like a big day. So this is great. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. However, priority is it to oppose a rapid response team that DPS could deploy in cities of the first class without city approval to respond to unsanctioned camping or large drug distribution. And I'm going to tease you here. Like, this is the bill as drafted, and then we're going to have you weigh in on alternatives here in a second too. So we're trying to kind of figure out where everybody's at and then have alternatives. So I'll leave this open for 30 seconds or so. I'll also note, I get questions all the time. What do you guys do with the Slido results? Well, we share them with the league officers. They see them. We staff will analyze them. Sometimes we break them down by different category of city so we can see if there are trends in the feedback. And then there are some, for example, vote by mail. We've asked you a bunch of vote by mail questions this year, and we've shared a lot of those results upstairs with the governor's office and with legislators. Okay, next question. How do you feel about entering into a mutually negotiated contract with another public safety agency like DPS to deploy a rapid response team to deal with unsanctioned camping or large drug distribution? So this is trying to get to if kind of the partnership approach as opposed to the mandate approach. Mutually negotiated. Yeah. That is true, because we're still trying to get to the priority piece. Like, is it a high priority to enter into this in your city? Or basically, we're trying to get a sense, if this was on the table, if this was the requirement, would that be a high priority, that you prefer that over the other ones? Or is that still just a low priority? But Councilmember Jacob, you're right. We probably could have termed it differently. We were trying to get the consistency through, but it's a fair point. Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Jared to talk through GRAMA. This is a bill that's in committee this afternoon, and it's another really, really big one that was part of the LPC preview email yesterday. Jared.
Thank you. You've probably seen this in the news where the State Records Committee is being proposed to be dissolved. So this SB 277 Government Records Management Amendments, this is by Senator McKell. It does three things, essentially. One, it creates a new government records office. Two, it replaces the State Records Committee with a director. We feel like this is good because Todd Sharon will no longer be on the State Records Committee. So what this does is the governor will select a director to a 4-year term, and in consultation with the executive director and the advice and consent of the Senate, there will be a legal trained individual knowledgeable in records law that will be the director. So that would be the qualification. The State Records Committee, composed of a lot of different individuals, will be boiled down into a law-trained individual. And lastly, it removes the balancing test, which is balancing the interests of access versus restricting that access. Now, this balancing test occurs after the determination of whether a record is public-private controlled, and then the Records Committee can then use that balancing test to determine whether access should still be granted or restriction of access. So it would remove that and essentially rely upon the current code of whether a document is protected, public, controlled. And so those are the three things. Right now, our staff recommendation is support. We think that this is a step in the right direction, having a law-trained individual who is trained in interpreting the law. So when those appeals come their way, that they are law trained. So in interpreting the code, but we any comments here on that, Lynn?
Lynn Pace, Sandy City. Just an observation. I think many of us in our cities have dealt with the process of replacing a board with an ALJ or someone who's trained. That provision I don't think is troublesome, but this bill is being saddled with all of the baggage of point number 3, and that is it is perceived as restricting or further restricting access to government documents. To that extent, if we come out in support of that, there's a good chance that our citizens will feel like we are in favor of restricting public access to government documents. I think that's a dangerous position to take, just because of the way this bill has been positioned in the media. So I would suggest we would be in a better position of saying, we support the change in the structure of the board, but we do not support point 3, or at least withhold that or be neutral or something, because I think it's dangerous for government to come out in favor of a bill that is perceived as restricting public access to documents.
Dave, and then we'll come up here.
So I'm Dave Quayle with Salt Lake City. Speaking more to the first 2 points that Lynn was addressing, Salt Lake gets about 15,000 GRAMA requests a year. So we are at the Records Committee quite a bit. In February, we had 2 hearings. And the concerns we have run into is it is just a very inefficient and inconsistent process. One of the last hearings I handled, we were there with multiple other cities, and the hearing was supposed to go first thing in the morning, and I did not leave until 5 p.m. The Records Committee pushed us back. They wouldn't give us a time certain. They then deliberate in open. They go into camera to look at records and have discussions. And they kept pushing us back and said, okay, we'll make a decision before the end of the day. Well, they ran out of time and said, okay, you all need to come back another day. So we have to go again. So that's, a day and a half wasted just to get a decision from the Records Committee. And oftentimes, because they're not law trained, and it's 7 individuals, well, other than Todd, not law trained, their decisions aren't consistent with the law. They're not consistent with their past practices, and it can lead to some really odd and very frustrating results. And while I don't disagree with Lynn's point at all about the public perception with the balancing test, it has led to problems as well. For example, one case that I handled, there was a Garrity statement at issue, which if you're not familiar with a Garrity statement, it is a warning that you give an employee who's done an action that could potentially be criminal and have policy violations for your city. It often comes up in an officer-involved shooting or something like that. Criminal implications, and maybe they violated your policies. So what happens is you give this employee a warning, and Garrity comes from a Supreme Court case. It then compels the employee to speak, but it protects them under the Fifth Amendment. And the court has recognized this is okay. So we have a Garrity statement from an officer, and the Records Committee said, yeah, we don't think that should go out under GRAMA, but under the balancing test, we're going to put this officer's potentially Fifth Amendment protected statement out in the public because we think the public has a right to know what's going on with officer-involved shootings. So while I definitely agree with Lynn's point on the perception, there are real concerns with the balancing test. I don't know how you address Lynn's concern in light of those issues. It's a balancing analysis on what we want to do.
Thank you, Lynn. Dave, did we have right up here?
Thank you. Bettina Smith Edmondson, Layton City Council. My question / suggestion is, instead of ridding the committee and replacing it with one person, could there not be a suggestion for modification of the committee where you maybe don't have 7 folks, but you have 5, and that those folks do have legal background, some type of training, so that it's not as subjective. And to the gentleman's point back there, if you have someone who does have legal knowledge, they can research precedents and be able to come up with, answers and information that is more in line legally, as opposed to just full on supporting. Because I agree with Lynn's point, and with the public, but also if you have folks on that committee who do have the knowledge to be able to make rulings and things that are in line with the law, then there's support for that. And it would give more teeth, I think, for us to feel comfortable supporting something like this.
Okay. We are still in discussions with the sponsor and others. So that is definitely something that we can consider all of the comments. Any other comments that we have?
Two quick comments. One, the balancing test is talking with some of the stakeholders, the piece that is most likely to, I think, see changes. So stay tuned on that. It may not be in committee this afternoon, but that's the area we're most likely to see some changes if. Changes too, so if that's changes there make us more comfortable, stay tuned. We may see something along that effect. I think the other piece is there are a lot of stakeholders involved in this one. So our opinion matters, but our opinion isn't everything. So there's a lot of people involved in this one. So I don't want to oversell that if we have an idea that it's going to go particularly far if we don't get buy-off from a lot of other stakeholders. So, but appreciate the discussion. I think that gives us what we need as far as comfort level with the different pieces. And yeah, we'll see where it goes after committee today. Any final comments on that one? Okay. Oh, data privacy.
Data privacy. Yes, still mine. I will try to be quick on this. This is a cleanup bill from HB 491 of last year. And we have essentially the same duties that we had last year. There is an extension on the date that we have to initiate the privacy program. There are other training requirements, reporting requirements, and all contractors after that. There's some issues with the drafting in this bill that we are working on. We really believe that we can get to a good solution on all of these issues. So right now we are opposed as drafted, knowing that we still plan on working with the sponsor, and I think that they are amenable to working on the language. So that's where we're at. Any questions on this one? Todd.
Todd Sheeran, Harriman City, and I find offense to all the comments on the last bill because I fixed all the problems. So it's a great committee. No, on this bill in particular, part of the definition of what PII is anything that can connect something to someone. Is that going to have any change? I know we've talked to them about that, but that was a big concern of mine because why do I need to have a document that's a public document by all means and then lock it up in Fort Knox so that no one has access to it until it's requested by grandma?
I think that we'll get to a good spot. Let's put it that way. I don't know whether the definition will change on that, but as far as the disclosure as well as the noticing on the public, on a public record, I think that we can get to a good spot. Molly.
Sorry, one thing before Molly goes on homelessness is just to be clear, the GRAMA bill is up in committee this afternoon. So we are going to go speak to it with the guidance that more comfortable with the structural changes, still some questions around the balancing test, but just want to make it clear, this is one we can punt. We can't really punt on much at all at this point in the session. That one is up this afternoon and things are good moving. So just want to make sure clear that everybody caught that.
Hello. For quite a few LPCs, we've been previewing that we are waiting for big bills to change things. And 2 of those bills came out last week. So we're going to talk about them. There will likely need to be, there will definitely need to be some type of coordinating clause between them. As you will see, they both deal with very similar sections of code a little differently. As of my interpretation with them right now, they do not contradict one another, but there will just need to be some alignment. So just a heads up for you there. So first is House Bill 505 by Representative Steve Elison. This bill contains a lot of provisions that came at the request of cities, whether they are shelter cities or cities going through the winter response. So just a heads up there. As such, I am recommending that we support this bill with some anticipated changes to provisions in the language. As far as the mitigation fund goes, it really streamlines reporting for shelter cities. Previously, cities had to go request their funding in the spring and then in the fall go report on the previous year of everything that had happened. So we're proposing that we shift that so that when cities go in the spring, they present the last fiscal year as well as present on their new funding requests so that they're only presenting one time a year. There has been a statute that requires alternative funding sources, and that's never been used. So they're looking to strike that. And then there was some problematic language last year that cities needed to demonstrate improvement around unsanctioned camping and pedestrian safety or panhandling, which cities can't really, they can enforce, but they can't really control how individual actors behave. And so now it's just kind of a consideration for how you are mitigating those impacts. As far as county winter response plans go, still requires county response plans. Both bills still require county response plans. Elison's bill, based on some feedback and some frustrations for how winter response was getting politicized in some areas, it requires counties to use objective data and blind reviews to evaluate sites. It requires OHS to notify the task force only about noncompliance. In the current statute, it says that OHS needs to notify a lot of people who aren't really even involved with this, so they're just streamlining that. And then it removes the UAC seat from the task forces, and actually that was a request. We would like for that to be the ULCT seat. There is still the flexibility for us to be on each task force with the way the code is written, but we don't have the bandwidth to necessarily be on 5 winter task forces throughout everything. So we're hoping just to get a little bit more flexibility for our staff on that one. And then there is some Code Blue adjustments as well. So as we've discussed with Code Blue, one of the biggest provisions is that cities need to participate in that regional or coordinated street outreach. That's now in May, and it's my hope that we can get some alignment into SB 182, which is Code Red as well. So to say that cities may participate in that outreach for both. Finally, this came out of a request from some of the shelter cities, especially Midvale. Shout out Midvale for pointing out this issue. Cities are held liable and expected to be enforcing no camping ordinances, and many municipalities have those ordinances in their jurisdictions. However, the state does not, and it makes it difficult to enforce a camping ordinance on state land if there is no law actually prohibiting it. So this law creates a definition for camping and also says that it is illegal to camp on state property unless it is expressly authorized. It includes SITLA properties. Looking at you, Sean. All right, perfect. If you unsanctioned camping on state land is a Class C misdemeanor, and kind of, again, the threads that go into other bills, HB 329, Representative Clancy's bill that we will discuss, requires that shelter cities have a definition of camping that aligns with state code. So we need to make sure that the definition of state code works. I already have a little bit of a concern with the cooking provision there, but we'll kind of hammer that out later. Are there any questions about Representative Elison's bill 505? Yes, in the back.
Victoria Petro, Salt Lake City Council. Why are we removing the UAC seat? I'm fully supportive of League representing us anywhere they can, but I think the counties are not performing to the same level as municipalities?
So that is a drafting error. UAC will still have a representative on there. The request was to remove the league staffer that had to be on all 5. So that we are working on. Yep. Hi.
Hi, Chris Wharton, Salt Lake City. I would point out that changing the will to a may and the city's cooperation, I think directly relates to the bill that we were talking about previously with the shelter cities. So I would just encourage people to notice that. It's all of those little things that add up that make this more of a shelter cities problem.
Thank you. All right, then we are going to move on to HB 329, first substitute that came out on last week. So the general provisions of this creates the Shelter Counties Advisory Board. Last year, we created that for the shelter cities. So it creates a kind of sister organization for the counties. It prioritizes innovative strategy system-wide. It removes one of the 2 county seats that was originally on the Utah Homeless Services Board and replaces it with someone with lived experience. And it creates a unification funding stream through the homeless to housing account. So essentially, if someone is unsheltered in Utah, but they have family in Kansas, they could use that money to help get that person to their family in Kansas. That came at the request of Salt Lake City. So thank you, Salt Lake. It's a great idea. Mitigation changes, it definitionally changed Tier 3 shelter city to any shelter that operates year-round and any winter response shelter. Definitionally, we need to tweak that a bit because it excludes some important beds that need to be included. It allows the Utah Homeless Services Board to allocate mitigation funding in full or in part. I made a request that if it is funded in part, that the city could go back and earn the remaining portion of their funding, and the representative was amenable to that. And then, and that is redundant and incorrect. The Utah Homeless Services Board shall coordinate with DPS, not the Utah Homeless Services Board, to determine municipal compliance. And that again, as Councilmember Wharton was pointing out, that's currently a may going to a shall. And then the winter response revisions here. The big one is that the task force needs to advise and provide recommendations to the Utah Homeless Services Board for need during the winter response period, including recommendations for site selection. Typos galore. And then task force changes. The county rep doesn't need to be the chief executive. Voting members then will appoint the 2 people with lived experience, 2 people from the LHC, and 1 public safety rep. And it brings the code sections that it had previously repealed back into the bill. So that's where we are with this one. Questions on the winter response so far? Okay. As far as operations go, it allows Know by Name, which is a pilot that is running in Weber County. It allows ARPA grant funds for residential, vocational, and life skills programs. It requires shelters to have a 0 tolerance for drugs and requires service providers to partner with law enforcement to ensure there is access to the premises with reasonable suspicion, requires clients to sign policies and procedure expectations at the shelters with if that shelter receives state and federal funding, and has a fiscal penalty for non-compliant shelters. I would say fundamentally this bill is largely a service provider bill. There are just some provisions in it that apply to municipalities. And then finally, there's a pretty big public safety component in here, which is that it is a first-degree felony to produce, manufacture, dispense, or possess with the intent to produce, manufacture, or dispense a controlled substance in or within 300 feet of a year-round shelter, a winter response shelter, a code blue shelter, or any permanent supportive housing that is licensed by the state. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right, thank you for your time.
Travel. Great. Super excited about this. All right. We have asked multiple questions on this, and we've had lots of discussions. Several of you have been involved in the Gravel group. We're going to go over really quickly what the current iteration of the bill does, and then talk about taking a position. So the basic gist of the bill is it allows an operator of a gravel operation to expand to new land that they own or control without permission of the local entity. That's the basic gist. So basically expansion regardless of the local zoning. Now, there are several things that we have negotiated into the bill that put some parameters around that. So when there's a deadline of January 1st, 2026, so 10-ish months from now for vesting, and you have to have not ceased operations for 24 months. So original iteration of the bill is basically if you owned or controlled land, you're going to be able to expand forever. This is putting a deadline of January 1st of next year onto that. So there's some kind of certainty that comes from that. Some other provisions of the bill that are in there that we negotiated in. Operator gives notice to a municipality before the expansion. That is current law. But in current law, there's only, or I should say in the first version of the bill, there's only about 10 days to respond to that. This expands it to 30 days for a public hearing. If the municipality makes a finding of endangerment to health, safety, welfare, then the municipality may impose mitigation standards. So there is something there with mitigation standards that wasn't there before, and they cannot prohibit expansion if the operator agrees to the mitigation standards. In interest of not making too many slides, the other piece to this is in current law, a mine can already expand. This already exists for a mine. This is just applying this to gravel, basically. In current law, there is nothing but that 10-day hearing for a mining operation. This idea of having a 30-day time period for a hearing and the municipality imposing reasonable mitigation standards also applies to mining operations, not just to gravel operations. So in the current sub, that is a fairly significant pickup that we don't have in current law that gives us some additional authority that we don't have. So that's where the bill is going. We do expect at least one other substitute to go forward on this one. But with that, with kind of the basic discussion around that one, just open to thoughts or comments on the bill. Carson, online.
We have a question online. What does vesting look like in this universe?
So vesting, if you own or control the land by January 1st, 2026, you're basically vested for that expansion, meaning you have that right to expansion going forward.
Jason McGuire, South Jordan. So are we with this basically giving them a year to just go up and buy up land?
So yeah, I mean, potentially there is a year to go buy land. I think, now I don't want to say that they can't just go buy land, but I also say I don't think there are a lot of places that can buy land very quickly if they're in those negotiations. So yes, that is a potential, but I don't want to overblow what that potential looks like.
Yeah, but so pick on neighboring city Harriman for a minute. Harriman has some gravel pits that were in the media during the past few months. So if that gravel pit owner was able to go and buy the adjoining land, then that adjoining land would have those vested rights.
Under this law, yes.
Under this law.
That is correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So over here to Lynn, and then I think we got some hands up over here. And you've got behind you too. So let's go Lynn, then Mayor Silvestrini, then back this way.
Lynn Pace, Sandy City. My reading of this bill is that the new land where they could expand their operations does not have to be contiguous to a current gravel pit operation. So they could buy land anywhere in the state, in any city in the state, before January 1st of 2026, and then open a new gravel pit at that location, correct?
So good question, maybe. The law is a little bit unclear. I should say the draft on this one is a little bit unclear. There are parts about it being contiguous. There are other parts that make it sound like they could expand. I don't believe the intent is for it to expand just anywhere in the state, but I do think the current law could be interpreted that way. So I don't think that's the intent, but I think you could read it that way.
Yeah, probably.
So, and then, yeah, Mayor. It was on. Still not on.
One of the concerns I have is that this idea that municipalities can impose mitigation standards, that's limited, that you can't impose anything that's greater than what state law allows. And frankly, some of those are inadequate to control a problem. The prime example that I give is that dust mitigation is not even required when prevailing wind speed is at or exceeding 25 miles per hour. And places like Parley's Canyon and a lot of the places where these pits are located, the wind is almost always at 25 miles per hour.
Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
So I'm on the subcommittee, Ken Leatham, North Salt Lake. I think there are things about this bill that are improvements, and to Justin's credit, he's done a good job chasing after some improvements. I would strongly encourage that we still oppose this bill. I think the expansion into adjacent land or contiguous land is really problematic. We do have a public hearing option, but that standard of finding something is something that would prevent it from expanding is a really difficult standard for a city to figure out. We're not health departments. We don't do scientific studies. We may have to if this bill passes. So anyway, I think in spite of the fact that there are some good things in this bill, that it does give us some rights in the mining space and it separates mining and gravel operations pretty well, I think we still need to oppose the bill. That's my comment.
Here comes. Yeah, back to Mark.
Is it going to work?
Yeah.
It's working. Oh, no. Mayor Ramsey, you're doing fantastic with the buttons. Thank you. To Ken's point, and we agree, the challenge we see is that when something like this gets dropped in your lap, even 30 days is not enough to do a study that's going to have any weight to try and push back. I think the thing that is the largest disappointment was there was an interim study that was presented to one of the committees that identified the need to give locals more land use controls and things of that nature. And so while they've ignored some of those things, we still aren't getting the ability to have some approval processes that we can control. We have an ability to try and fight back. 30 days is not enough to do a comprehensive study. So if you feel like something's going to land in your city, you probably ought to start your study now. And you probably ought to arm yourself so that you can oppose this and put those conditions in place, because it's not an easy task. So I'd be with Ken. I think that, yes, they're offering us something, but it's a Scooby snack. It's not a solution that we want.
I have comments. I'm going to stay off those.
Hey, Justin, can I ask a quick
Yeah,
question?
Mayor, please.
What has the mining industry said about this? I haven't heard how they've weighed in on this, but I'm wondering what their thoughts are.
As to well, I'll look this way. As to the part where we get additional mitigation standards for mining, I know at least Kennecott has come back and said that's fine. So the mining
That was
hasn't
pretty
been-
much my question. Where's Rio Tinto?
I know what you're
That's
asking, so
the
I answered
closest
it.
one to me. That's kind of what I needed to
Yeah.
know. Okay,
Yeah, they said they could live with this.
that's what I wanted. Thank
Yeah.
you. And Mayor Walker has a question.
I think,
Oh.
Mayor Walker, yeah. So I think, Ken, if I was taking your comment, you're making a motion for us to change our recommendation from position pending to oppose.
Turn me on.
Okay, Mayor
All right.
Silvestrini, second. Yeah, Mayor
I'm
Walker.
filling in for Kate. She had to leave, so we have a motion. State your name again and where. All right, second, Jeff Silvestrini, Mill Creek. The motion is to oppose the bill, not be pending. Let's do a voice vote. All in favor of, plus online, okay. All in favor in the room of taking a position of oppose, say aye. How many are opposed to that?
Opposed to opposing.
Opposed to opposing. Okay, we have 0. How about online? Can we get some?
Okay, we're unanimous. Okay, thank you, Mayor. We'll take that. We'll update the position on that one. Lots of eyes coming in. All right, and then on this one, so follow-up question, how high of a priority, there's a slide again, is opposing the zoning preemption in HB 355? So again, as Carson said earlier, this is us trying to figure out where we put the muscle and put the work into different bills. And this just helps us gauge that. So how high of a priority is opposing the zoning preemption in HB 355, the gravel pits, for your city? And the other thing I just want to clarify from earlier, when we said we share these results with legislators and those upstairs, we share them anonymized. So we're not running up and telling them who said what. Just want to make sure you all know this. We're just giving aggregated anonymized data when we go share the results of these things. Wow, it's been 4 weeks. We're still on that. Yeah. All right. With that, We're going to close that one. Talk about elections, another easy issue. We do expect, I know we talked about this one a while last week, HB 300. We do still expect to see substitute language on this one that we've changed. But as a reminder, if anyone who doesn't remember, this is the bill that said ballots will be mailed to voters, but ballots must be returned in person with voter ID. Voters using a Dropbox show ID, Dropbox would only be available during certain hours. So share the slide results we got from you last week. What is your comfort level? And so for most voters, mailing ballots to voters returning in person but showing ID, only a 10% comfort level with that change. 13% comfort level with Dropboxes only being available during certain hours. And then including the last 4 digits of your driver license along with your signature and being able to mail the ballot, which is one of the options that we've heard maybe out there. 63% comfort with that one. And none of the above, 36%. With those recommendations from last week, or those results from last week, staff is recommending we oppose as drafted. And then knowing there could be a sub out there that changes our position on that one. But we heard you last week. That's where we think we need to go this week. So as of now, the tracker will show oppose as drafted unless someone makes a motion to go a different direction. Carson.
Question from Brigham City. What if a voter doesn't drive and has no license?
So there are options that they can still get a vote by mail ballot in certain circumstances. And that was law before we ever went all by mail. There are still options for them to do that under any iteration of this.
Could a state ID work?
So yeah, question is, we haven't seen any language. This is just a concept, but most of the discussions I've heard around it would include some kind of state ID. Yeah. It's honestly all the same database that they're looking at. I think we're opposed to draft unless people say otherwise. So I think we're good. Okay. With that, jumping on, municipal broadband. So we talked about this one. We got your results on this one as well last week. This one that say broadband expansion goes to the vote of the people under the current draft is the quick version. You can see alternative being negotiated per the Slido results that we got from you in previous LPCs. But one is enhanced notice for future cities to do broadband. So instead of taking it to the vote of the people, there'd be some enhanced notice requirements. And the second, revenue bond with voter approval only if there's other revenue sources. So if you're getting the revenue bond just based on funds you'd get from the subscriptions of those broadband users, no vote. If you're going to use property tax for some reason or other revenue sources at that point, it could go a vote of the people. Did I get that right, Dave? That just make sure. We are syncing up right after this meeting to talk through that with a few folks, but that is the direction we're going on this one. Opposes drafted, but that could get to a neutral place if language gets out there that we're more comfortable with as per your direction in the previous meetings. So with that, rev and tax, kick it over to you, Cam.
You thought the agenda was too full. Look at us. We're going to make this. For the Yeah, I mean, the agenda is too full, but it's also part of the fun of having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bills. So it's not our fault. It's the third floor's fault that we have a full agenda. The good news is this will be pretty quick. We've presented multiple times on these issues of the difference between a tax and a fee, but now it's crunch time. Representative Karen Peterson's House Bill 454 will be in committee tomorrow. We recommended last week to support the bill. You ratified that. Her bill has these two key differences, and we wanted to put it up on the screen again because from last LPC to today, we heard from a couple of cities who the previous version of the bill didn't really apply to them, but because of these tweaks, it now applies to them in a different way. And we want to make sure we have all of that information now while we're in the session, as opposed to 2 months from now after the session. So that's why we're putting this back up. Nothing has changed from last week. These are the two key differences between House Bill 367 last year and House Bill 454 this year. House Bill 454 in the transportation utility fee space requires in our methodology to have separate categories, including houses of worship. And then it also says we cannot impose it solely based on property ownership. For a couple of cities that have imposed transportation utility fees to date, their utility fees would not match this. And it's contemplated that every city that currently has one of these fees would have to start over and reimpose the fee based on the runway in the bill. And then the public safety fee, if your city is a third class or smaller contract with a political subdivision, then you still have the authority to do so. You just have to reauthorize it every 3 years. Does not apply to volunteer public safety fees like the fees that exist with some of our communities in Sanpete County. So again, want to make sure people see this. It's in committee tomorrow. Our intent is to support the bill. We're still waiting on a counter bill that will start in the Senate that would carve out houses of worship and nonprofits from paying the fee and may make other process changes that would make these fees basically impossible to do. But we've not yet seen that language. We still have 13 and a half business days to go. Okay, House Bill 456. This bill went through committee on Friday. Our recommendation is to stay position pending, but I want to take 30 seconds to explain why. This bill was never designed for most of our members. This bill was really at its core was designed to help rural Utah deal with search and rescue challenges and then have some additional tourism related mitigation. We want to make sure though that the cities and towns that have a high impact from tourism are also part of the bill. And that's still not really the case right now. That wasn't the intent of the bill, but we're still trying to get that in there for those communities, because if we're investing additional tourism related resources in those counties, we want some of those dollars to flow directly to the cities. So we don't want to take a position yet, so we can keep this conversation going. We met with the floor sponsor of the bill this morning to pitch a couple of new ideas to him about how to allocate to those high impact cities. The high impact cities that are in the meeting today, my request is that you just stay after with us for a few minutes, because Representative Bolander, the bill sponsor, is waiting to meet with me within an hour on this. And I just want to circle up quickly. I know some of you who are online, we won't be able to do any sort of hybrid. So just shoot me a text or email if you have additional questions. But basically what we're trying to do here is say that some of the new money would go directly to high impact cities. High impact cities would be defined based on your share of the county tourism taxes that are collected and generated within your city, as well as looking at the resort community tax and the hotel beds that are available in your city, and your city provides public safety services beyond your city. So definition, that's some combo thereof, and then having money that would flow to some of those communities based on a formula. Okay, so for those of you who are in the room that are interested in this, stay after, find me. We need to take about 5 minutes before we go meet with Representative Bolander. Any questions on any of the big tax and fee bills? We did talk last week about potential changes to property tax, the constitutional amendment and the like. That's still out there. We still have concerns about that bill. Stay tuned. There's a lot of concerns about it up here, and we're getting to the point in the session where a lot of concerns about a bill often become a reason for the bill to pause during the session. So stay tuned. Jared.
Okay, this is SB 154, sub 1, and this is legislative audit amendments. So what this does is, and I should say this before I start, this bill was heard in committee this morning, and the league, as well as the Attorney General's office and the Utah State Bar, all spoke against SB 154. And right now, the sub is much, much, much better than the original. However, there are still some concerns related to the drafting of it. Right now, it requires a process to go through to receive or to challenge the request from the legislative auditor general, and instead of them just being able to do away with the attorney-client privilege and attorney work product privilege, now there's a process that is much like the court process that you typically go through. So just to run you through what that process looks like, there would be a request from the legislative auditor general. If say to the city, and the city says, well, we're going to not give you these documents based upon it being attorney-client privileged. We would then provide them a list of the claimed privilege items and any supplemental briefing or info within 7 days from the time that we refuse. Legislative Auditor General then would challenge that and select an arbitrator at their discretion. So that's number one of the one of the concerns that we're still trying to address. And then the arbitrator will make a determination within 7 days favoring access to the Legislative Auditor General. That's concern number two. It is no longer an objective standard. We are now favoring access to the Legislative Auditor General. And if they lose on any item, the governmental entity must reimburse for the cost of the arbitrator. So this is number three concern, is that it does not allow for parsing out of those costs if the city wins on certain privilege claims. So if 9 out of 10 are legitimately attorney-client privilege information, we would still have to pay for the arbitrator. So there are still things that we are working through and hope to be able to work through with the sponsor. One thing to note here at the bottom there, privilege is not waived as to any others. It is not considered a record under GRAMA. And so, so the fourth thing is it doesn't specifically prohibit the Legislative Auditor General from sharing that information with any other parties. So we may have information that we don't want to go out to other individuals or groups given the information. And so that's the other concern that we'll be bringing up with the sponsor. Now, the SB 154 sub 1 is connected to SJR 4. SJR 4, now there is a sub that came out last night. And it does away with a lot of the negative implications that we had last time we met. But there are still some things that we would like to see change. So we hope to be able to work with the sponsor on that as well. If SJR 4 does not pass, then SB 154 will not go into effect. So there's a coordinating clause between SJR 4 and SB 154 sub 1. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Any questions on these? Yes, thank you, Roger. The SJR 4 does take a 2/3 vote requirement. Who is this? Oh, okay.
Does that work now? Okay. It's my fault then. So, I practiced law before I was mayor, and the attorney-client privilege is really important. It's like the patient-doctor privilege or the clergy privilege. It really encourages frank conversations between attorney and client, and we need that. Sometimes we have council members or whatever that don't necessarily understand all that stuff. And so having frank conversations is super important. But the thing that bothers me the most about this is that there's no guardrails on the legislative auditor for releasing information that they might learn that's privileged. And if you're involved in a lawsuit with a developer or another party, and your conversations with your counsel become public, including your counsel saying, this is a pretty weak claim, we might want to focus on this rather than that, that can totally destroy the position of a municipality in an unfair way, right? Because the other side's not going to be sharing their attorney-client communications with you or your counsel. So this is just kind of like a hard line. And it is really one of these situations where it is a solution in search of a problem. I know that this may be targeted with respect to our former Attorney General maybe, but it doesn't have anything to do with any municipality that I'm aware of. And to invade the privilege like this unnecessarily is just wrong. It's wrong.
Thank you. Anybody else on this? Okay. So right now, this is opposed as drafted, both the SB 154S1 and SJR 4 sub 1 as well. So what we would like to do, again, one of these priority questions is how high of a priority is it to oppose changes to the local government attorney-client privilege confidentiality in SB 154? We good? We're at 100. Okay. All right. All right. 105. Okay. So there is another bill separate and aside from SJR 4 and SB 154. This is HB 215. Representative Burton is running this. We are at a neutral on this. What this does is it makes a Class A misdemeanor if you intentionally hinder, delay, falsify, or prevent a legislative audit by preventing force or intimidation or deception, altering, destroying, concealing, or removing any material from the legislative audit, making, presenting, or using material, information, or resources known by the actor to be false, and then a Class B misdemeanor if intentionally hinder, delay, falsify, or prevent a legislative audit by concealing audit requested or non-privileged information, providing false information, or warning any person of an impending legislative audit. There are some concerns with the language here. The concepts, I think that we are okay with. So this is one that we'll be hopefully talking to the sponsor to see whether we can tie down the language on this. But right now we are at a neutral position. Any questions on this one? So this one, HB 364, this is governmental immunity amendments. What this bill does is it's being run by Representative Christopherson. What this does is it provides governmental immunity to law firms or attorneys that have been contracted by a municipality to do the legal work related to that governmental entity. So what it does is underneath the definition of an employee in the Governmental Immunity Act, it includes another definition underneath that of independent contractor. And that independent contractor is now given the same governmental immunity that an employee of your city would typically have if they're doing legal work for the city. There is an exclusion as far as them receiving benefits, workers' comp, any of the benefits that an employee typically would receive. Well, yeah, they're right there. Seniority, status, benefits, insurance, salary, minimum wage. And so we've received positive as well as concerning comments from our members. For the positive, we're hearing, well, this would reduce the cost for us to receive or to contract with an outside entity for legal work. The situation behind this is one of our cities hired out a contract attorney. They were sued individually, and their firm was sued in the lawsuit for some contract work on development agreements. So that's kind of the genesis. There are concerns that have been expressed as well, saying, well, because this is underneath the definition of an employee, if there are any things that are anything in this list that is not mentioned, that they would still be able to receive that because it's not a comprehensive list. Other language that was sent to the drafter, and the drafter, because it was the way that it was sent to them, they said, well, we don't want a 200-page bill. So, because if they took that language the way that we gave it to them, it would be a long bill. So right now, we're receiving both comments on both sides. So right now, we are position pending. Any comments you may have on this?
So my question would be, if a contractor gets that's doing business with a municipality gets governmental immunity, what happens if there's a dispute between the municipality and that independent contractor? Do they get that immunity in a case if they've malpracticed on the city with respect to that? I think I can think of one that could be blossom into a claim between my city and an independent contractor engineer. You know, how does that work? I mean, I think it's fraught with a bunch of unanswered questions. That could be a concern. And it's one of these things where we have to think about all these possibilities, not just, you know, it sounds good in the context of somebody whose attorney gets sued, but there are other ramifications.
The language, I would say the language isn't clear on how that situation would play out. Yes.
Bill assumes that you are going to be hiring a firm, or if you hire a shady firm.
Well, can you shut off that microphone back there? Oh, it's not that doesn't surprise me. Choose wisely, I think, is the concept there.
That's not sufficient. There needs to be skin in the game, color of law violations, federal violations. We see it daily. So the bill needs to take that into consideration, or it's a bad bill.
Thank you. Lynn, did you have? No, you were just pointing to, okay. Anybody else? Oh, yes, sorry. I think retirement is next.
All right, we'll give people just another minute or two to vote. We're almost at 100. A second, okay. Well, I'm just gonna go ahead and advance. If you have additional feelings, please let Jared know after the meeting. All right, so retirement. We have two bills to talk about in retirement. The first one, Senate Bill 20, which gives the RS participating employers the option to pick up that additional member contribution, the mandatory member contribution portion, only if they also make a similar contribution to hybrid employees. And I want to frame our recommended position on this is neutral. We've heard a lot of cities on both sides of this issue. We've heard cities who support it because they would like to have that option if the URS rate comes back above 10%. We've also heard from cities who are really concerned that this is a further erosion of that tier 2 employee contribution approach. So just recognizing that A, this is an option, it doesn't require cities to do anything, and B, we have concerns about the overriding policy, not necessarily this specific mechanism. We think that neutral is a good place for us to arrive at, so we're not actively speaking for or against the bill. Are there any questions about that position? Cool. Justin told me I have to be fast, so I'm trying to keep going. All right. This second bill is sort of a similar approach. So HB 417, we haven't talked about this yet, but what this allows is specifically a public safety employee can be re-employed only by a local education agency. And if they meet that criteria and they're providing law enforcement services, so not becoming a teacher or other, I don't know what other role they'd have, then they would be able to continue to double dip and collect both the retirement and the pay from that new employer. Again, I think this raises some potentially concerning questions about tier 2, about reemployment in general. However, this doesn't actually directly impact municipalities, seeing as we're not like, they would no longer be an employee. This could have some minor possible change to rates, but we're not exactly sure what that looks like. And the purpose behind this bill is really trying to make sure that we're getting more applicants into that school guardian policy that we have. I know there's been some concerns both from cities, from members of the public, from everybody about who the individuals are who are filling that school guardian role. I believe the bill sponsor's intent here is to make sure that it's qualified public safety officials who are going in and acting there. So again, we're neutral on this because it doesn't really directly impact us, but there is sort of this bigger question about tier 2 reemployment. And I also want to add both of these bills, I'm not sure if either one of these is going to pass this year because there's some, I think, a lot of reluctance at the in both bodies to make significant changes around employment and retirement in a year where money is so tight. So we will keep monitoring both of these. We'll stay neutral on both of these, but I just wanted to give you a quick update if you see or hear from your city officials who have questions or concerns about them. Questions on 417? All right, Justin, how's that for quick? All right, this one should be even faster, short-term rentals. So we have HB 256, which is Representative Walter's bill. We currently support that short-term rental bill. It has 3 components. First, clarifies the not well language. Second, it clarifies how local governments can interact with listing sites. So it says we can't, it specifically authorizes us to allow listing or to require listing sites to remove listings that are unlawful and to require a business license within those boundaries. There's been some stakeholders who are concerned about that, even though it preempts cities from doing any other listing site policies. And then the third piece revolves around using listings for tax enforcement. So we're supportive of the bill now. We've heard that there's some other interests who are concerned about this. What we are going to do, because I don't want to, and you don't want me to try to rehash all the ins and outs of the last couple of days on this issue in front of everybody, we're going to call a short-term rental working group meeting. I'll reach out to the cities who've been involved in the past, but if anybody else is interested in this issue, please email me. It'll be at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. It'll be on Zoom. So if you're interested, reach out to me and I'll get you a Zoom link to talk through all the ins and outs on short-term rentals. All right, billboards, nice easy issue.
All right. Okay, good news is, folks, we put on the agenda, we would end at 1:45 and we still have 3 minutes to go. So the substitute for House Bill 198 came out late Thursday night. And then it was in committee Friday morning. We circulated a couple of key questions to our work group on this. Our priorities in negotiations have been 1, 2, 3 here at the bottom. Focus on freeways, don't change the obstruction standard, relocation in the same city only. The first substitute goes from 1 mile to 4 miles for relocation on freeways, and then says if there's an obstruction, it can go from 500 feet to 4 miles. Again, the trigger here is the reconstruction of the road, reconstruction of the freeway. Then State Road went from 1/2 mile in each direction to 1 mile due to the reconstruction. And then the status quo is an ambiguous statute about relocation within the same city. As we've heard back from our work group, the work group has actually really been concerned about item number 3 here. They're concerned about all 3 of these, but number 3 has come up the most in the feedback thus far. So we want to just get a sense again, we're trying to prioritize our time and bandwidth over the last 3 weeks. This is our last Slido question today. Existing code is ambiguous. Whether a billboard can be moved from one municipality to another. Again, this is just in the context of when there's been freeway reconstruction, state road reconstruction, that then triggers the potential relocation. So state law right now is ambiguous. We have some folks who feel like state law does not allow city to city, and other folks who feel like it could allow that. It has only really happened in the past that I know of once between Sandy and Midvale, but it was done via an agreement, not via mandate. So again, we'll just get a sense from you, is this a high priority to clarify the existing code on this piece? And then if you are part of that billboard work group and you haven't responded, we need your responses today because we are finalizing our decision of how much are we going to continue fighting this bill and which points are the most important, and the industry is waiting to hear back from us. So I'll leave this open for a few more seconds. Hopefully we'll get to over 100. We said 1:45 and I still have a good minute to go until then. So Mayor Wilkinson. Yeah, so the question from Mayor Wilkinson of Centerville is update to cost. So all of this is related to cost. Ultimately, if UDOT rebuilds I-15, which is going to happen in your neck of the woods, if UDOT rebuilds I-15, there's a broader area where the billboard can go. If the billboard cannot find somewhere that meets state and federal law, UDOT is responsible for the compensation. But if they can't find somewhere based on local zoning, so in other words, something that works, but then the city doesn't allow it, then the city's responsible. That relationship hasn't changed. What has changed is the flexibility to relocate. Okay, we're basically at 100 responses. All right, so to recap, 3 bills that are time sensitive. House Bill 465, I want to emphasize the recommendation was to oppose as drafted, but we're looking at other alternatives. Let's find a better way. SB 262, the general fund by ordinance, we'll be testifying against that in committee this afternoon. We gave you those names earlier. And then number 3, supporting 277, based on the feedback received today with a focus on the changes to the State Records Committee. And then there will be additional action alerts coming on these bills and several others because we're in crunch time here for the next 13 and a half business days. With that, Mayor Walker, the bill tracker's up. We've walked through everything on our agenda. I'll turn it back to you.
As presented. I was like, thought maybe you guys wanted to stay for a while. Okay, we got a motion. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the bill tracker as presented, say aye. Those online as well. Are there any opposed? I'm seeing none opposed, so that's approved. Motion to adjourn. Thank you. Is there a second? All in favor of adjournment, say aye. All right, any opposed? We're adjourned.